Serious, what is the most horrific thing you've ever personally witnessed? When I was 17 I went on a boat trip on the lake with 2 of my aunts and 4 of my cousins. My aunt's boyfriend was driving the boat back after an awesome day. It was dark. Out of nowhere, another speedboat plowed into the side of ours at full speed, killing one of my aunts and my 9-year-old cousin instantly and sending another aunt into the water to be found the next day dead. After I realized what happened I heard screams from the dark water. It was the driver of our boat with my other baby cousin in his hands trying to swim back. He said he couldn't feel his legs, so I jumped in without thinking, giving him a life jacket, and swam back to the boat with my baby cousin who was alive but bit her tongue in half. She was 4 or 5. When the driver finally made his way back to the boat I pulled him up and noticed both of his legs were shattered, bones sticking out, and bleeding. I didn't even get a scratch on me. Worst night of my life. I found a dead body under a highway underpass walking home from a bad party at 3 AM and the guy had what I assume was an overdose in the middle of the sidewalk while kneeling, sitting on his feet, looking straight up with his arms hanging down and his palms were up. The way he positioned himself was just very surreal for some reason, and I'd also never seen a dead body outside of deathbed coffin scenario. This is exactly how I found my boyfriend dead in the bathroom from an overdose. Truly horrific. My dad dying. It's a really weird feeling. It was awful, but on the other hand I've never felt closer to him. He'd been asleep for 2 days at the end on palliative care. He couldn't talk anymore. When he died he woke up from his sleep and I was there holding his hand. He gave me the biggest smile I've ever seen and then his heart just stopped. I spoke to him the whole time and said thanks for everything he's done for me. It felt awful, but also I was glad he wasn't suffering anymore. I'm sure this is so hard, but I am imagining this scenario from his perspective and I think it would have been a really warm and loving way to go. Thank you for doing that for him. During my college years I attended a basketball game and there was a guy who had a heart attack and died. The horrific part was before they took him away the paramedics were there doing chest compressions on his pale body for what seemed like an eternity, all while the unassuming crowd in the stadium kept cheering and laughing and celebrating all while this man was dead right there. Kinda sounds like recent events at a music festival. I work in downtown Denver and saw a lady jump off of the building next to mine. Her body exploded when she hit the ground, sending blood and chunks flying 20 feet in every direction. I was numb at the time from the shock of witnessing such a horrific event, but about 3 days later I had a complete mental breakdown. I still have the image burned into my mind. I sincerely hope you got therapy, friend. That's impossible to even imagine, and I'm so sorry you had to go through that. I walked in on my dad moments after he had stabbed and killed my stepmom. He was calmly sitting on their sofa without a shirt on, covered in blood. He had been diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer about 6 months prior. The cancer had spread from lungs to his brain, and unbeknownst to us, 2 tumors had developed and were pressing on some vital areas in his brain. He was having hallucinations and a bit of a psychotic episode when it happened. He didn't know what he had done until days later. While he was in custody they treated the inflamed tumors with an oral steroid and his mental state returned to his normal self, and that's when he learned what he had done. He was so distraught. He just wanted to die. They were married for 35 years. He died 3 months later in custody, but we were lucky enough to be able to visit him a few times before he passed. I used to work on a respiratory unit at a hospital. An old lady who was chronically trached. She'd been on one for maybe around a year, and with her age, delicate skin and lack of good care at the previous hospital, the trach site had decayed and sloughed enough to create a hole in the front of her neck I could have fit my adult-sized fist in. And she was still alive. First and thankfully only time I've seen the throat windpipe esophagus of a still living person. It was horrific. Similar to this, I was at an In-N-Out here in LA, and I'm used to getting asked for money and food by homeless people. This one guy asked me and I turned around and holy Jesus, his eye and most of his cheek were completely gone, such that I could see the muscles moving inside his head when he spoke. He looked like Gus Fring in Breaking Bad after the bomb went off. A popped cranium after the person's head was run over by a bus. It's not a pretty scene, even for the morbidly curious. The twitching is a traumatic watch. On a calm early morning in my small town, I walked a couple of my friends home after my party. We live near the Arctic Circle, so it was sunny at 3 a.m. Beautiful weather. As I was making my way back home, I witnessed an ATV accident on a treacherous hilly intersection. A woman and her child with no helmet flipped and tumbled 30 feet into the ditch. The 6-year-old was crying when I came up to the scene. 911 on the phone. The mother was unconscious but still breathing. Faced down. I was on the call with EMS while giving CPR to the woman, but when I rolled her over, I noticed her head was caved in and blood gushing out and pooling on the ground beside her. I had to reassure the daughter with a broken arm that everything is fine and the ambulance is coming. The mother died in my arms. One of my daughter's classmates was in an ATV accident with her mom. They got clotheslined by barbed wire. The child was too short for the barbed wire, but the mother was decapitated. The child now has severe mental health issues due to the trauma. Compared to some of the comments, this is pretty tame, but it's been stuck in my head since I was about 8. We had a pair of blackbirds nest in our garage. Dad stopped parking his car in it, kept the door closed and the window open, and would occasionally take my brother, then 5, and I in and lift us up to see the chicks. We were so excited to see them growing. The day they fledged, our neighbors, grumpy old bastards at the best of times, set mousetraps baited with bread, caught every single one of our baby blackbirds and gave them to their dog to finish off. My brother and I were standing the other side of the fence screaming and crying. Mum came out, but just shepherded us indoors because she was scared of the neighbors too. Oh, and they were doing this to entertain their grandchildren. Absolute miserable effnkers. We had a home invasion a few years back. The perp shot my husband multiple times in front of me then ran off. I had to put pressure on his chest with a towel to keep him from bleeding out until the police got here. I remember the blood pouring out of his chest like a dang water hose and him just gasping for air. I don't know how he's alive. I think about it every day. Every now and then we still find some of our things with blood stains, and always just go, Jesus Christ. Oh, my God. I was so relieved and happy to hear that you didn't lose your husband. I used to work in adult protection. Guy was keeping his 75-year-old mom in horrific conditions, hooked on M and pills, had dementia. Dude was collecting her social security. Also work child protection. Had to respond to an 18-month-old child brought to the beating to death by his dad. Sorry for my English. From the Netherlands. I was working as a dock terminal worker. We drive cargo onto ships. Big cargo, like what you see behind trucks etc. So one day we took a break on the bridge that connects our port with the ship. The new foreman of the ship, who just got promoted, at 24 years old, took a break with us on the bridge as the sun was shining and the weather was perfect. As we start to end our break and our jokes, a fellow worker came driving backwards with the cargo as he just had to pick it up from a chauffeur. We drive with tug masters with rotating chairs. The 24-year-old foreman who just got up started to check his clipboard with positions of the cargo we just drove onto the ship. As he is checking and concentrates on the clipboard, he's standing behind the cargo. The fellow worker who just got back in his tug master was ready to go and didn't see him as he was standing in the dead angle of the rearview mirrors. We were all still sitting on the bridge. As he starts driving and the foreman was still standing still, having no idea he already started driving as he was wearing headphones as is mandatory cause there's a lot of noise. He drove backwards and in 1 second we just saw him turning from a human being into guts and blood and brains. It's like it happened in slow motion. We were all yelling at the drive but it was already way too late. The second he hit him it was over. He felt no pain probably. As we were all in shock and crying and going crazy, we see this flock of freaking seagulls coming up the bridge and just starting to peck at all the human remains and flying away with intestines and brains and guts. To this day this is still the most freaked up thing I ever saw in real life, and still to this day keeps me up at night reliving the whole scenario. OMG, I hope you're fine my friend. That sounds absolutely terrible. Guy slammed his car into mine and literally died mangled in front of me on the hood of my car. Wear your seatbelt people. We're all glad you're still here, and it is very important to wear seatbelts. My uncle got T-boned a few years back and thanks to his seatbelt he didn't go flying. In junior high, during a gym class, I wasn't feeling well so I wasn't taking part in the class. They were doing relay races. A girl tripped and fell down. She broke her leg so badly, it looked like an extra knee. She was in traction for nearly 6 months. More recently we were out doing errands, and we drove by a motorcycle accident. One person was sitting on the curb, and he was rocking back and forth. The other was nothing but a lump of meat, laying in the middle of the road. Thankfully someone had covered her with a large coat. I couldn't get that image out of my head for almost 6 months. It still pops up in my every now and then. I was doing relay races in gym class in high school, and as my friend was running to me I saw his eyes roll up into his head and he fell back into an absolutely massive seizure about 10 feet from me. Turns out he was severely epileptic, didn't inform anyone, and had stopped taking his seizure meds for whatever reason. The image of him seizing up mid-stride has stuck with me 15 years later. Saw a dude's face get stomped on when I was a kid. Didn't realize the gravity of that till years later. Looking back now, that man most likely died in front of my eyes. I did the rid of my younger brother's body. He had committed suicide by laying in front of a high-speed train and was cut to pieces. Official cause of death on the certificate was decapitation. It over 20 years ago and still get flashbacks, and I'm now getting help from a psychologist. Sorry buddy, I hope this is helping you. Take care. A guy drowned in a popular waterfall in Tennessee. I jumped in to find him, but the water was murky because it had just rained and the pool was deep. I finally found him after 3-5 minutes of searching through moss and boulders with goggles on that I got from a little kid on a floaty. He was floating standing straight up about 3 feet underwater. It looked like the scene on LOTR when Frodo falls into the marsh. I pulled him out and did CPR for like an hour to no avail. The moment I saw him in the water was the creepiest, weirdest thing I've seen. He was pale and limp but floating, and the current from the waterfall was moving him towards me like a ghost. I watched myself hemorrhage and heard the sound of the monitor flatline before I coded. The look on my husband's face when I knew what I knew. I wasn't going to make it. I was going to leave him a widower with a newborn. The look in his eyes will never leave me. I've told the story here before. I hemorrhaged giving birth due to medical error and was bleeding internally for an hour before gush. Just a puddle of blood beneath me and spilling down the bed. The nurse rang the all-call code and I was rushed back to the operating theater. After locking eyes with my husband, they wheeled me past the doors where he could follow. I heard the angry beep of machines, and then all the lights and sound were being sucked out of the room like a vacuum. Then nothingness until I woke up in the ICU. This happened to me in 2012 when my placenta burst at 5 months. All the same you expressed, and I remember feeling so peaceful as it was happening. That feeling of peace still sticks with me, as well as feeling, seeing, and smelling all my blood before I lost consciousness and thinking he needs to come down. I stumbled upon my best friend when we were teenagers, hanging by his neck in a closet. His eyes were ice blue and his face was so freaking red and his body was convulsing. I was absolutely in shock. If a couple minutes would have went by, I would have stumbled upon my best friend, dead, hanging by his neck. I don't even remember thinking about anything, or what I should do. I went on autopilot at that point and just lifted him up and got him out of there. I'm 32 now, we're still best friends. That's so amazing. You're a hero. The body of a young boy caught up in the front end of a commuter train in Saitama, Japan. I was a passenger on that train. When I used to work for the county coroner, I got a call to go to a scene on the local freeway at 2 AM on Christmas morning. A 19-year-old kid in a little sedan full of presents was racing to make it home in time for Christmas morning. It was super foggy. He shot across the freeway from a side road the same time a giant diesel truck hauling a trailer was coming. The truck obliterated the sedan. When I arrived on the scene, it was insane, surreal. Fog and flashing emergency lights, car parts and Christmas presents all over the road. And in what was left of the cab, a boy still clutching to the steering wheel. Eyes wide open, mouth working like a landed fish to talk or just breathe, I don't know. Paramedics called it. He was dead. His body just didn't know it yet. Most the car's transmission had ripped through his lower torso in the impact, nearly tore him in half. Some deputies and medics stood around him and waited till he finally closed his eyes and let go of the steering wheel. Then I was able to take him away. I got home that morning and just went right back to bed and laid there the whole day. Christmas has always been kind of weird ever since then. I think about it a lot this time of year. There's a lot of tragedy and horror in this thread, but this story was the one that made me cry. That poor kid. That poor family. Worked as a physician scribe in a few different emergency departments. One I remember vividly was a young 20s woman being wheeled in on a gurney. The M sent an intern in before they unloaded the ambulance to warn us of what was coming and what we needed. Small rural hospital with limited staff and resources. Soon after, this poor woman is wheeled in and the gurney is drenched in blood from her waist down, dripping off the sheets and onto the floor like a blood trail from a movie. Turns out she was actively having a miscarriage. After all the groans and screams and transferring her to the bed, the doc ordered the nurse to grab a bucket and position accordingly. Within a few minutes a fetus about the size of an orange just kinda plopped out into the bucket. I'm still in medicine, but as a 19-year-old that was a holy crap moment. I'm a trained forensic interviewer for children who have witnessed or been victims of crime. While I haven't seen a lot of things, the stories I've heard about the truly heinous things people do to children would chill you to your bones. I then get to ask the child all the questions like how far were his fingers inside you, what could you feel, tell me everything about the time grandpa gave you ice cream from his willy. I no longer do that work, and I would never do it again. Ooh ok yep. This one. Setting my phone down for a few minutes after reading this one. You're a stronger person than I. A car fire. I could see a shape inside the car, which I assumed to be the occupant. I suppose I should be glad that I couldn't see it in any detail, because it was wreathed in flame, and the incredible heat kept me from getting closer. Even from 30 to 50 feet away, it felt like that feeling when you open an oven and the blast of hot air hits you in the face. As the buses were leaving my high school one day, there were 3 seniors in a truck that got in front of us. They pushed one of the guys out of the truck. Our bus ran him over. He died instantly, but we had to stop for a long time right after we cleared over him. Ambulances took a while and I was in the back of the bus, so I was just sitting there with his body right behind me. What the frick? I hope the other 2 got charged, cause holy crap. My dad's dead body in a casket after he died in a motorcycle accident. I had seen him 7 hours prior to the accident, and he died less than a mile from where I lived. I was 7 when it happened. I'll be 30 in a few months. I'll never forget that day or the day my mom told me he died. That happened to my nieces and Sil. Brother-in-law was running late for work. Hit a deer about 2 miles from home on his bike. Dead on scene. Consoling my sister-in-law was tough, but breaking the news to my nieces was heartbreaking. Probably the hardest thing I've ever had to do. My wife and I took the junior high youth group from our church to a Detroit Tigers baseball game around 2007 or so. One of the bars within a block or 2 of the stadium had a rooftop terrace, and I witnessed a man drunkenly topple over the side of it and fall from about 3 stories up to the pavement about 20 feet in front of us. Thankfully I don't think the kid saw too much of the event, but the image of deep red blood pooling around his head will be with me until I die. Amazingly, I think the guy ended up surviving his ordeal. I read somewhere that falling while drunk, you are more likely to survive because you are loose. If you are sober, your body tenses up so you break more. Heading down to the subway after work and there's a flood of people coming the other way, far more than normal. I get to the platform and see that someone had jumped in front of the train and killed themselves. While I didn't see the body, I saw and heard the wails of the train conductor. The poor woman was inconsolable. I hope she got help and is okay. A friend of mine's dad works for the TTC, Toronto Transit, and his best friend had someone jump in front of his train. Apparently the guy's head went through the glass right in front of him. He's been on leave for like 10 years now. Just can't get his head right. For years he said every time he closed his eyes he'd see that guy's head coming through the glass at him. Watched a guy doing about 150 on a bike slam into a car that had just pulled out to make a turn. Car had a mom and 2 kids in it. She just broke down crying when I ran over. The kid on the bike was dead on impact. No helmet or riding gear of any kind. The look of that body still haunts me. I let the mother know she could have her kids go sit in my car and watch TV while we talked to the police. There was a female officer, and I do know who that woman was, but she was an absolute angel helping talk this young lady down. She didn't get into any legal trouble, since she stopped and looked. My dashcam caught part of it. I turned over that footage. This was in 2016 and I can still remember it clear as day. 2015. I was coming home from a game night. It was about 12 AM. I pass an intersection and in my side mirror I see white SUV, the kind that has the back doors over the back tire a bit, hit the stoplight pole. I guess I went into auto mode and filmed a U and called the police. I parked off street and ran to the car. I see a tall man walking toward me, muttering, "I think I killed my friend," over and over. By now there was some bystanders around and I told this woman to make sure this man did not look at the crash. Then I rushed back and the second man, who was in the back driver's side seat, came to me. All his teeth were knocked out in the front. He was bleeding from his head. So I set him up with another bystander. Then back I went. The front passenger was unconscious. I grabbed his arm and remember it being so heavy, tried to find a pulse. There was a bystander there with me and we both tried to find a pulse. As I looked over his body, I saw his leg. It was broken on the bottom femur and the bone was sticking out. Then he sort of stuttered a breath out and then the fire depth was there. I handed the man's arm to the fireman and told Jim I can't find a pulse. The cops took me aside, helped me clean up. I had blood on my hands. Then I sat in my car for a while. When I asked to leave, I saw a sheet over the car. I knew he died in front of me then. For a while I had really bad PTSD. I made myself drive past the spot. I saw blood on my shoes the next day and threw up and had a panic attack. After some time I found a therapist who did EMDR therapy. EMDR saved me. It helped my brain find the pathways to recovery. Now instead of panic attacks, I can file the memory away. I still have driving anxiety and I will never buy a car like that. I also struggle with not being able to express somebody's last moments to their loved ones. I asked a lot of EMT workers how they deal, and they all said therapy and time off. At an Irish dancing competition in 1996, during the heavy jig a lad slipped as he went for a front heel click. Instead of the heels connecting, he kicked himself full force in the inside of his left heel bone. As his left foot was the one coming back to the floor, he tried to correct and laid it awkwardly, completely separated the joint and tore the ligaments. When I was a teen, I was with my mother while she was changing out something on a pool's pump or something. She did it all the time. This time though something happened and while she was working on it a cap burst off at high speed and hit her in the face. 1 second everything was normal and the next she's bleeding and her jaw is basically gone. She's passed out. I'm screaming. And my dad comes running out only to pass out when he sees my mom. So I call 911. As I look down at the bones of her face no longer actually on her face and her face just like split open. I had nightmares for years about it. I honestly thought she had to be dead. Luckily, she lived. She had to have her face reconstructed through multiple surgeries and couldn't talk for nearly a year. And part of the worst of it was that insurance claimed that her facial reconstruction was cosmetic surgery because she had it done by a plastic surgeon and insurance refused to cover it. It's been years and I know my parents are still fighting them about it. That doesn't sound like it should be hard to win, seeing as it's surgery to fix someone's face from a life-changing accident. Just shows how greedy people can be and how corrupt the world is. My sister having to make the decision to pull the plug on my niece after she drowned. I became a fundamentally different person after that. I'm not sure which was worse, losing my niece or seeing my sister lose her daughter. Lady begging outside a market in Vietnam had a baby wrapped in blankets. She approached me asking for money and unwrapped the blankets to reveal the most deformed person imaginable. Almost didn't look human, it was so deformed, and she kept pushing it towards me while asking for money. Later someone else told me she was actually the envy of the other beggars there and she has something for people to pity her for and she gets more money. They have tried to steal the baby from her to use it as their own begging aid. The entire situation was stressful and you are left horrified, just not knowing what on earth to think. Bomb damage assessment in Iraq. Airstrike on a bunker complex. Mostly just devastation. One guy had been trying to get into a sandbagged fighting position when it collapsed, trapping his head and one arm under the beam and sandbags. He was face down. It had taken him at least 10 minutes to suffocate. He had dug deep in the sand with his feet trying to get out. All the nails on his other hand had been ripped off and 2 fingers dislocated as he tried to rip through the sandbags to free his face to breathe. Walking home from high school, someone jumped their car over the sidewalk to try and kill a kid. The kid's head hit a tree and that bloodstain was still on the tree when I graduated. I have no idea why it happened or if the kid is still alive. This is one of my worst fears. Horrible way to go. A head-on car collision. A man had a stroke at the wheel and drove into the oncoming lane and hit a mother and baby. I was first on scene. She couldn't move, was conscious, and I realized that the white things sticking up were her femurs that had punched through her legs. Her daughter had been flung out of her car seat and into the dash of the car. She was 18 months old. They both survived. Man who hit them died on scene, impaled by iron rod that pinned him to the steering wheel. Baby girl ended up a quadriplegic. Mom is a paraplegic. This was about 12 years ago. Every single car you pass might destroy your life. I had to go to a hospital when I was visiting home in China. Most medical services where I lived were privatized and needed payment upfront or at least a deposit before you'd be seen. Naturally, this meant that many of the less fortunate patients seeking medical care couldn't afford it. I was quite young at the time and didn't really register what I saw until years later, but as we were walking from the parking lot, my mother and I saw a woman kneeling on the ground screaming and wailing like I'd never heard before. We slowed down, confused, but couldn't really understand her until someone nearby pointed out the bundle in her lap. Apparently she had come to seek help for her baby, but was either too late or was turned away. The infant had passed away in the parking lot right outside a major hospital. There was nothing to be done by then, and my mother, having realized what we were witnessing, quickly led me away. The energy in that moment was surreal, and I don't think my young brain processed it properly until not long ago when the memory randomly resurfaced. The sounds parents make when they lose a child are possibly the most haunting thing I've experienced in my career. You can just never get them out of your head. Sorry you had to see that so young. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.